I'm going to first talk about something general, which is that there's been discussion here when I was here earlier, and I understand even in my absence I went to vote about, who's for what, and, you're for loan programs or not. And I just hope we don't take things on and off the table. I think we need to keep everything on the table at this point. We have a huge problem ahead of us. And I know there's been discussion about having a hearing here where we talk about solutions. I'm for that, but I want to be sure we have the data to be able to do it. So I would hope that if we have a hearing about data, that we have about solutions, that we have the data and information that we need, particularly an analysis from PBGC and from CBO on the options. So a lot of us have requested that for the last several months, and we still don't have the numbers that we need to be able to, I think, make important, informed decisions. Ms. Wong, I want to ask about some of the rules here, and one particular one that troubles me, which is the convoluted rule that could actually result in hundreds, maybe even thousands of employers, particularly small employers, going bankrupt if this isn't addressed. And that's what you talked about a little in your testimony, the uncertainty regarding minimum funding considerations. We talked in the last hearing about this, and we talked about the fact that employers in healthy plans have got to meet their minimum required contributions every year based on new promises they've made to new employees, promises they make to current workers, particularly in addition to any accrued deficiencies they have in the plan's funding standard account. But once that plan goes into critical status, that changes, doesn't it? And I think it's something to focus on in terms of the law, and maybe an inadvertent but a potentially negative consequence, because then the trustees are required to come up with this rehabilitation plan, which can include exempting them from needing to contribute the required contributions, at least under normal accounting standards. And additionally, employers have the excise tax liability enforcing payment of these minimum required standards, minimum required contributions waived as well. So once you go into that status, it changes. And for employers in central states, my understanding is that employers are currently paying less than half of what their minimum required contributions are, as an example. At least what they would be doing under normal accounting standards. And once that plan becomes insolvent, it might no longer technically be in critical status, right?
Right.
So
that's the uncertainty, exactly how
what
the rules
happens
work
there?
together.
I mean, it's unclear to me, looking at the legal part of this, the actual statutory language. What happens with the excise tax then? We asked Joint Tax Committee about this in anticipation of this hearing. We've heard that Treasury has never issued guidance on this issue. The statute's ambiguous. And, I think it's enormous uncertainty and a potential for a catastrophe for a lot of businesses. So you noted that a multi-employers plan must satisfy certain code provisions, the rehabilitation plan, and you said that if a multi-employer plan fails to make scheduled progress under the rehabilitation plan for 3 successive plan years, or fails to meet the requirements applicable in plans in critical status at the end of the rehabilitation period, for excise tax purposes, the plan is treated as having a funding deficiency. Let's translate this a little bit just for our purposes today. It looks to me like once an insolvent plan can't show improvement or meet rehabilitation plan requirements, when central states becomes insolvent, doesn't that mean that employers would have to meet their minimum contribution requirements and possibly pay excise taxes?
And that's what the law says. So
how does that
and
make
let me
sense?
take the purpose of the rehabilitation plan was to allow and to give plans time and employers time to make those plans whole again and make them solvent. Mm-hmm. The concern is that, and again, we were involved with PPA and making that happen. We didn't foresee what would happen in the time before that. And so the thought wasn't given what would happen if there was an insolvency at the PBGC, what would happen if there was a major plan insolvency that would impact those rehabilitation plans or the entire system like we're facing now. And so I think it was an oversight in terms of how those rules work together. In the report we issue today, that is what we point out, that legally there is the ability for the IRS and the PBGC to come in and reimpose those minimum funding standards and the excise tax. If it will happen, we don't know. Because
aren't you really saying that you're hoping that the IRS does not enforce the law, that they don't read the letter of the law, and which would require massive contributions and the potential insolvency of hundreds of businesses, just in central states example?
We think it's unclear. And that they can come in and assess it, but it is unclear about how and when or if they could do that.
Mr. Langdon, how would uncertainty regarding a possible funding deficiency crisis affect the mass withdrawal possibility?
A mass withdrawal is defined, it's not insolvency that creates a mass withdrawal. It's when all the employers leave or substantially all of the employers leave, or it can be triggered by the trustees making
But
that
this
decision.
this could be resolved,
Yes,
right?
it could.
Yeah.
What will happen in essence that a lot of folks are concerned about is people will start leaving. They'll see that there's no benefit for their participants that are in the plan. They'll see that there's no hope this plan is going under, and they'll start heading to the exits
Yeah.
at
Which
that
would
point.
lead to the meltdown of the entire multi-employer system, probably.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, I think it's something we're going to have to address as part of whatever solution we come up with, certainly at least adding clarification to it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.